What is Team CBT? I would say it goes all the way back to my medical student days. I was a terrible medical student, and I wasn't a pre-med in college, and I kind of got into medical school accidentally. I skipped a lot of classes, and I really wasn't a very devoted medical student because I never wanted to be a doctor. But one thing I did do is I went to this place in Palo Alto called the Human Institute, and it was just a lay organization by this fellow Hussein Chung had started it. And it was an extreme form of psychodrama. And essentially, they'd have these rent a house, or someone would give them a house for 48 hours, and then maybe 35 people would go and pay $35 a piece to go to this psychodrama marathon. And one by one, you had to go into the center of the ring, and they would confront you, and it was really brutal and pressure you until you finally let go of your defenses and let out the person you really were. And most people started sobbing at that point and crashing, and then people would take and throw you up in the air, and there would be this celebration, and everyone would get euphoric. And I learned a lot of things from psychodrama, and one of them was that almost every human being has things inside that we're hiding, and we put on this false front, like I'm trying to appear as wise and interesting and maybe funny or maybe inspiring. As humans, most of us are pretty ragged, and we're not always what we seem to be, and we have all kinds of flaws and faults. And I never saw anyone in a psychodrama marathon who didn't have a kind of conversion experience in those 48 hours. It was terrifying, but once you finally crashed and let out your true self, so to speak, it was pretty amazing, and I never forgot that. In fact, my own experience, the first time I crashed in a psychodrama marathon, they got me out in the middle, and they're kind of pressuring you to cry and to open up. And I've always had a lot of trouble crying because I don't know why, but when I was little, 7 or 8, I was in this thing called the Highlander Boys in Denver. That's where I grew up. It was kind of like the Boy Scouts, but it was a little different. It was a paramilitary organization, and Denver was kind of conservative. And so what I would do, I would run to the bus after school, even when I was 7, and take the bus all across Denver to the headquarters of the Highlander Boys, which was next to this kind of military place where they stored rifles and stuff. And then we would essentially drill with rifles for 2 hours. And that's what it amounted to. And you were supposed to learn discipline. And if you smiled, you had to pound your hands on the ground for 30 minutes as punishment. Everything was about self-discipline. And the whole idea behind it, they were trying to make potential juvenile delinquents, I guess. But I remember once we had to go to summer camp. And again, it was up in the mountains, a beautiful area, but we were just drilling all day long with rifles, and we had to take turns on guard duty. Once I was on guard duty in front of the infirmary where kids went if they were getting a cold or something like that, and I was just sitting in a chair in front of it. I think they forgot to change the guard, and the sun was going down, it was getting cold and dark, but I was really determined to be disciplined and to follow orders. But I didn't know if I was going to have to be there all night or what. And then 2 of the men who were directing the thing happened to walk by, and I started crying, hoping that they would hear me. They came over and asked what was going on and saw that I was crying, and they got very angry because I was crying. And they were saying, well, let's take him behind the cafeteria and give him a whipping. And then the other man said, well, maybe we should give him a break. And they debated back and forth and decided not to do that. But they told me, a man doesn't cry, and don't you forget it. And after that point, I was never able to cry. And so in the marathon, they were pushing me and trying to get me to open up, and they would confront you with all of your weak spots and phony aspects. But finally it happened, and the tears came, and I just started crying and sobbing, and it was a pretty phenomenal experience. It was like being opened up. Then, I went back to the edge of the circle. I guess they'd come out, and everyone was kind of hugging me and having this celebration. David had finally crashed, and it was a very heady experience. And then I remember I was looking at the faces of the other people, and I saw a young woman, and she had like a radiation mark on her face. They would paint like a kind of a purple area if you were getting radiation for cancer. And I said, oh my gosh, this woman must be dying of cancer. I started crying, and they said, David, why are you crying again? And I said, well, I think that woman is dying of cancer. And it just makes me incredibly sad. They asked her, are you being treated for cancer? And she says, no. And then radiation things seemed to disappear from her face. And I'd seen it as clear as could be. And she said, but he is right. She says, I am dying inside. I'm dying of loneliness. And I've been trying to fake it out with everybody. And then she started sobbing and had her crash. And then she kind of opened up and suddenly felt close to people. And things like that would happen just constantly throughout those 48 hours at the marathon. I got used to the idea that people can change rapidly. And I went into medical school and psychiatric residence. And then when I went into medical school, into residency to become a psychiatrist, the things I was taught just were so different. And I never saw people really recovering from anything. We would ask people to share their feelings, and then we'd give them antidepressant medications and type of thing. But I missed that dramatic change. Hi there. The video ended a little abruptly, and there was just one more thing I wanted to say. I was really inspired what I saw when I was a medical student going to those psychodrama marathons with Hussein Chung at the old Human Institute in Palo Alto. And that's why I've devoted the last 40 years of my career to developing new, powerful techniques that can bring about that same dramatic change. And I call the new technique Team CBT, T-E-A-M, and CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. It's a new high-speed, it's like cognitive therapy on steroids, but it's gentle and yet powerful at the same time. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I love and appreciate you as a fan, or maybe just a curious observer. And I hope you enjoyed the story I told today. And remember, there's a whole lot more where that came from.